would like to share with you a book called Who Eats What? This is about food chains and food webs. It was written by Patricia Lauber and illustrated by Holly Keller. A caterpillar is eating a leaf on an apple tree. Later, the caterpillar is spotted by a wren and becomes part of the wren's dinner. Still later, the wren is eaten by a hawk. Leaf, caterpillar, wren, and hawk are all linked. Together they form a food chain. Each is a link in the chain. The hawk is the top of the food chain because no other animal attacks and eats hawks. The animal at the top of a food chain is always the last eater, the one nobody else eats. Suppose you eat an apple off the tree. That makes you part of a short food chain, the apple and you. You are the top of the food chain. Or suppose you drink a glass of milk. Now you are the top of a slightly longer food chain. The milk came from a cow, and the cow ate grass. So the chain is grass, cow, you. Every time you eat a meal, you become the top of several food chains. You can draw a picture to show them. If you had a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, a glass of milk, and an apple, the picture might look like this. Food is the fuel our bodies need. Food keeps us alive. It gives us energy we need to grow, move, and do many other things. The same thing is true for caterpillars, wrens, and hawks, for all animals. All must find or catch the foods they need. When you draw a food chain, you are drawing a flow of energy. The arrows show its path. There are many, many food chains, more than anyone can count. But in one way, they are all alike. All food chains begin with green plants. Green plants are the only living things that can make their own food. They are the only living things that do not need to eat something else. Green plants take energy from sunlight. They use it to make food out of water and air. All animals depend on green plants for food, even animals that don't eat plants. Hawks, for example, do not eat green plants, but the hawk ate the wren that ate the caterpillar that ate the leaf of a green plant. And so the hawk is linked to green plants through the food chain. It needs the plants as much as the caterpillar does. Take a walk and look around you. You will see parts of many food chains. Look at the leaves and flowers of plants. Look at the bark of trees. Look at fruits, nuts, and seeds that have fallen to the ground. What animals are eating them? You might see a grasshopper eating a blade of grass. You might not see another animal eating the grasshopper. But you can find out which animals eat grasshoppers by going to the library. You can read up on grasshoppers and any other animal you've seen. You can draw food chains. Your drawings will show that one plant may be the start of several food chains. The leaves of an oak tree may be food for caterpillars. Beetles may bore into the tree's trunk. Acorns are food for squirrels, chipmunks, blue jays, and deer. The drawings will also show that most animals are part of several food chains. Chipmunks, for example, eat many foods. They eat nuts, seeds, berries, buds. They may also eat insects, snails, and other animals. And chipmunks themselves are eaten by weasels, bobcats, foxes, coyotes, hawks. These animals may also eat some of the things chipmunks eat. Try drawing some of these food chains on one page. You will have arrows branching in all directions. Now you have drawn a food web. Food webs are made up of many food chains. On land, most food chains are short, but scientists still have much to learn about them. They have even more to learn about food chains in the seas. These chains are long. They are also hard to study because most of the plants and animals live underwater. This food chain starts with tiny little plants. They're eaten by striped anchovy, who's then eaten by the Atlantic mackerel, who's then eaten by the dog snapper, who's then eaten by the great barracuda. In the water, as on the land, food chains begin with green plants. Some of the plants are tiny. You need a microscope to see them. Some are bigger. Some plants in this picture are kelp. You have tiny plants, cladophora, sea lettuce, red algae, pepper dulse. The green plants are food for many tiny creatures, which become food for bigger creatures. Small fish are eaten by bigger fish, which are eaten by still bigger fish, which are eaten by even bigger fish. In this picture, you have tiny plants and animals that are eaten by the heron. And then a tarpon eats the heron, and then a blue shark comes along and eats the tarpon. The biggest, such as tuna, are at the top of the food chains, unless they are caught by humans. Then one of them may turn up in your tuna fish sandwich. Both the tuna and you are part of a food chain that began with a tiny green plant. Food chains are found wherever life is found. The far south of the world, Antarctica, is icy and bitterly cold for much of the year. But in summer, its seas come alive. The water is rich with tiny green plants. They are fed on by tiny animals, and these are fed on by small animals such as krill, which look like shrimp. All these animals and plants are food for bigger animals such as fish and squid. Many other animals come to feast in these waters. There are seals, whales, and dolphins. There are many seabirds, among them penguins. All the animals are linked to the tiny green plants. This drawing shows a web of food chains at the far south of the world. The arrows show who eats what. Follow the arrows and find the animals that feed on krill. One of them is the blue whale, the biggest animal on Earth. Find the animals that eat krill. Sometimes people talk about catching krill for human food. But what would happen to the food web if fishermen took huge catches of krill each year? To find out, look at the drawing again. Humans often make changes in food chains and webs. Then they find that one change causes another change. That was what happened when hunters killed nearly all the Pacific sea otters. The otters lived off the west coast of North America. They lived in beds of giant seaweed called kelp. Every year, thousands of otters were killed for their fur. By the early 1900s, almost none were left. But as the otters disappeared, so did the beds of kelp. And so did eagles, harbor seals, and fish. What had happened? The answer lay in the kelp. Kelp is the green plant at the start of many food chains. It is eaten by tiny animals that are eaten by bigger animals that are eaten by fish. The fish are food for eagles and seals, as well as people. Kelp is also eaten by spiny animals called sea urchins. In eating, they may cut off stems at the seafloor. The kelp then floats away. Sea urchins are one of the foods otters like best. But when hunters killed the otters, there was no one to eat the urchins. The urchins destroyed the kelp beds. Once the hunting stopped, the otters made a comeback. They ate sea urchins, and the kelp began to do well. When the kelp did well, the fish came back, and so did the eagles, seals, and fishermen. All over the world, green plants and animals are linked in food chains that branch into food webs. A change in one link is felt up and down that chain. It is felt through the whole web. And that's one good reason to take care of the earth, to take care of its plants and animals. When we help them, we also help ourselves. We too are part of many food webs.
Let's review food chains and food webs. In food chains and food webs, what do the arrows between organisms represent? So what this question is asking us is, in a food chain or a food web, we have plants and animals, and there are arrows between the plants and animals. What does this mean? Why do we have these arrows, and what do they show us? In food chains and food webs, the arrows represent energy flow. They show us how energy is flowing from one organism to another. In this example, which way should the arrow point? Here you have a plant and you have a grasshopper. So you need to think about which way energy is flowing. Is the plant giving energy to the grasshopper, or is the grasshopper giving energy to the plant? Right. In this example, the plant is providing energy for the grasshopper. So energy is going to flow from the plant to the grasshopper. So the arrow should point from the plant to the grasshopper. Whenever we're looking at food chains and food webs, plants will always be at the bottom of our food chain or the bottom of our food web. Either the plant or the sun. That's where all of our energy originates. The sun produces energy. The plants absorb that energy. They convert it using photosynthesis into food, and that's how they grow. Animals then eat the plants, and that's where they get their energy from. This image shows a food web from our book, Who Eats What? You can see in this image, at the bottom of the food web, you have tiny plants. At the top of the food web, you have a killer whale. So, everything is getting their energy ultimately from the tiny plants. You can trace a food chain from the tiny plants all the way up to the killer web, but you can take several different paths, and that's why this is called a food web. For example, you can start with tiny plants. Tiny plants are eaten by fish, and the fish are eaten by the killer whale. Those three organisms make one food chain within this food web. Another example would be, you could start with tiny plants. The tiny plants are eaten by krill. The krill are eaten by seabirds. The seabirds are then eaten by the leopard seal, and then the leopard seal would be eaten by the killer whale. It's a longer food chain, however, that's still just one food chain that makes up this food web. This is considered a food web because you have many different paths. Food webs are affected when there's a change in the population of one of the organisms. An example of this would be a change in the population of, let's say, the fish. Let's say that humans are fishing and they overfish. So we're losing our fish. We're taking them out of this food web. Well, if you take fish out of this food web, then the killer whale who eats the fish is going to have less food. And so the killer whale population may suffer because the killer whale has less food. In fact, the killer whale may start eating something else more. It may eat more of the blue whale. It may eat more of the leopard seal. And this could affect those populations as well. So you can see how this is a chain reaction. Changing one population can affect another. Let's look at another example. Let's say that you are taking too much squid out of the population. So the squid are dying off, we have less of them. Well, the squid gets its energy from the fish. It eats the fish. If there's less squid eating fish, then there may be more fish. And so that's a result of losing one population. You may have more of what it eats. So you may have an overgrowth of the organism that is being eaten by the thing that is lost. And so we want to be very careful as humans as to the effects that we're having when we're removing animals from the population. It is very important for us to take care of the earth and take care of the plants and animals. And we need to help them and make sure that we are protecting what is there because they in turn help us. We are part of a food web and we need to keep the food webs that we have stable.